Hello, and welcome to the No Wrong Notes podcast, a show hosted by me, Veronica Kokis, holistic voice teacher and singer just like you. Grab a cup of tea, relax, and sit back as we discuss all things singing technique, mindset tips, and more so you can show up as the most confident and creative singer you can be. Hi, y'all. It is obviously already February, which I honestly can't believe. I mean, January just kind of flew by. And for those of us here in the Northern Hemisphere, apologies to my friends in the Southern Hemisphere. I recognize that this episode may not entirely apply to you in this moment since you're in the middle of summer, but maybe save it for later when winter comes back around. But here in the Northern Hemisphere, we have less than 6 weeks until spring. And it is still winter, and with cold weather sticking around for a bit longer, today's episode is all about embracing the winter season as a singer. And I include some things that you can do to take care of your voice in the meantime. Now, as a little bit of a disclaimer, I recognize that everyone is different and has access to different resources. So with everything that I share in this episode, and really any other episode, take what resonates and leave the rest. If something I share is a big no for you, that is totally okay. Now, to move on to the first topic. So I first want to address the idea that it seems like everyone hates winter, and I'll be honest and say that I used to as well. I feel like winter gets a lot of hate. It seems like summer always gets a ton of love, and personally, my favorite season is fall, so when winter comes along, it's not always the most lovely time of year, depending on where you live. For example, winters in Texas, where I grew up and lived until 2016, those winters are a lot different from the winters that I experience now in Virginia. Obviously, we are still a southern state, but we are, a little bit further north, and we do get snow sometimes up here. Depending on where you live, though, you might hold less hatred towards winter. But for those of us in colder climates, winter can be a long slog of frigid, cold, and nasty weather, keeping us indoors for months. We can often find ourselves longing for warmer days and summer, but instead of trying to rush through the winter months, what if we actually lived in sync with the season rather than trying to push it away? We humans come from nature, and our ancestors lived in response to the changing seasons around them. When we start to embrace the seasons around us as we live our daily lives, our bodies reap even more benefits. For example, according to an article from The Guardian, going for a walk in cold and or wet weather can improve respiratory health and immunity due to the abundance of negative ions that are in the air. So bundling up and going for a walk in the cold isn't a bad idea. Just layer up and get some fresh air. I personally love wintertime walks. I try to get some fresh air at least almost every day, pretty much. If I don't have time in the morning, maybe I'll go after lunch. But I personally love wintertime walks. You just gotta have the right gear. Something that you often hear in the outdoors community, especially among hikers, is that there is no bad weather, just bad gear. So bundle up and get some fresh air if you feel called to do that and if you have access to that. Aside from embracing the season through wintertime walks, it's also worth reframing wintertime as the season of cozy. Just as animals hibernate and get cozy for winter, we can get cozy too, of course, through layering up when we go outside, surrounding ourselves with more blankets and pillows. I personally love swapping out my blanket in the winter for a weighted blanket. And honestly, I use the weighted blanket throughout the year. I think it helps with anxiety and that sort of thing. But I love swapping in those heavier blankets. Again, other ways to make winter more cozy are through taking more naps. So give you guys full permission to take naps. You can also even adjust your sleep schedule. So obviously, especially in the dead of winter where it is dark, it's darker for more time in the day. The sun sets earlier and all of those things. Adjusting your sleep schedule and maybe getting more sleep is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a pretty natural thing. Going back to other ways that we can make wintertime more cozy, sipping on warm beverages like tea. And I know that singers are notorious for using their scarves and drinking warm beverages when cold weather arrives, but it actually makes perfect sense for us to cozy up during the wintertime. Again, going back to our ancestors, looking at what the animals do in the wintertime. Guys, this is the time for cozying up and hibernating. So please do not hesitate to hibernate, to get cozy, really embracing the season here. Another way to embrace the wintertime is through adding more seasonal ingredients to your meals. And listen, I'm not here to tell anybody how to eat. We are all very different, have very different bodies and needs, and I totally understand that. However, I think it is really cool to kind of throw in some seasonal ingredients into the meals that you're making or the meals that you're consuming. It can be really a fun way to shake up what you're normally eating, throwing in something new, having some variety and having some novelty, I think can be really fun. And while I know it is tempting to enjoy watermelon slices in the middle of February, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that, please enjoy your watermelon, but eating seasonally is often cheaper since produce that's in season is often lower priced. So I highly recommend this as a way to kind of shake up your meal routine if you're really feeling bored with your meals and really embracing the season. I know that right now, and actually the past couple of weeks, citrus has been on sale at Trader Joe's because it is actually in season. So highly recommend embracing some of that. One more thing that I also try to do in the wintertime is that I try to romanticize it. I take pictures of the winter sunrise and snow when it does fall. And I like to listen to winter playlists that I find on Spotify. Some days I'll just type in like winter morning and I'll kind of pull out a playlist that looks good and listen to that. So I think it can be really fun to romanticize the wintertime. All right. Now, while some of these things that I've mentioned so far aren't strictly vocal, I'd like to touch upon a few ways to care for your vocal health this winter. The first is to stay hydrated. This is obviously a year-round thing, but since we're inside so often during the wintertime, HVAC systems, like having your heat turned on, can really dry out your environment. So hydrating is important. And if you want to take things a step further, steam, use a nebulizer, or I honestly really love having my humidifier on throughout the day. So I'll just put some water in the humidifier and just plug that into my office here and just have that going all day long. And I feel pretty great. I want to emphasize too that when it comes to things like steaming and nebulizing, you don't need a fancy like vocal mist, though if you can afford it and you really want to make that investment, go for it. I mean, using steamers and nebulizers is really, really effective for the voice. It's really, really helpful in maintaining moisture in the vocal folds. So if you can afford it and you want it, why not? Go for it. But actually, a really cheap way to steam is by boiling some hot water, putting that in a pot, and then once the water is boiling, let it cool off for a couple minutes since you don't want it extremely hot. But while that water is still warm, putting a towel over your head and bending over where the warm water is and kind of inhaling that steam can be really helpful. I know that some people also like putting in a few drops of some essential oils like peppermint and inhaling that with the steam. So that's just kind of a cheap way to steam if you want to go there. Moving on to another little tip for singers or something to keep in mind. It might also be worth investing in an air purifier or running the fan on your HVAC system if your HVAC system has a fan function. Now, before you're like, what does this have to do with singing? What does this have to do with my voice? Bear with me. One of the main reasons that people get sick in the wintertime is because of poor air circulation and air quality indoors. Because if someone who is sick, even if they are asymptomatic, is in the room with you and the fan on your HVAC system isn't running, which would then circulate the air, or if you don't have an air purifier to recirculate and circulate new air, the pathogens that the sick person is breathing out are being circulated and recirculated in the room. And obviously we don't have control over air quality and air circulation in all of the spaces that we kind of enter throughout the day, whether you're going to school or going to work. You don't always have control over the air quality in those places, so I understand. But if you're at home and if your HVAC system has a fan function, run it. And I also was doing some research, and I'll include some of that research in the show notes. But research was also showing that running the fan can also help reduce your energy bill. And that might take some trial and error, kind of seeing like, does this really help my energy bill and that sort of thing. It certainly will help circulate new air in the house. So obviously have that benefit. But it's worth checking out if your HVAC system has that. Obviously air purifiers are a little bit more of an investment. But I know that, you can get small air purifiers on Amazon, which if you can shop local, please shop local. But if Amazon is kind of the cheapest option for you and it's the only one you've got, you can find air purifiers on Amazon for pretty inexpensive prices. I think probably less than $50. Moving on to another way to care for your vocal health this winter is to work with herbs through brewing tea or using tinctures. I want to emphasize that I am not a professional herbalist. Honestly, taking an herbalism course is one of the things that I kind of want to do either this year or next. But there are obviously people out there that you can learn from and that know more than I do in this moment. But I do love learning about herbs and consuming teas and adding herbal tinctures to my water to boost my overall vocal health. And when it comes to tinctures, I know that my Whole Foods, the Whole Foods here in Richmond, they actually have tinctures in the health and wellness section. They have like little tinctures that you can use that are tinctures for like echinacea or boosting your immune system, other various herbs. So you can find tinctures at places like Whole Foods. If you can shop at like a local health store, highly recommend, seeing if your local health store that's local to your area, seeing if they carry those. I know Elwood Thompson's here in Richmond also carries so many tinctures. I love going there. Shout out to Elwood Thompson's. But anywho, if you're looking for tinctures, health food stores are the way to go. Though, to be honest, throat coat, which you can find it in so many places. I mean, I saw it at Publix, at Target. Throat coat is an awesome tea for singers as it contains herbs like echinacea and mullein that help your respiratory health. So highly recommend checking out, your tea aisle at your local grocery store. Or if you really want to get that concentrated herb in a tincture form that you can just put in your water. I will say to do your research beforehand when thinking about purchasing any herbal tincture or drinking any herbal tea, because these teas and herbs can have interactions with different medications. So please, if you are like typing into Google, herbs for vocal health or herbs for respiratory health, be sure as you are looking at those herbs on those lists to double check what they interact with, whether they interact with other medications, whether they interact with, things like birth control. That's a really good example. I know that there's some herbs that interact with birth control, so be sure to check that out. Or that may have other side effects. So being sure to do your research before you purchase anything. I know throat coat is pretty harmless, but yeah, if you're looking at other herbs, definitely do your research first. One more tip that I have for singers is to extend your warm-up if you're feeling up to it. Go slow and go for longer if you have the time to do so. This especially applies to singers that might be feeling fatigued. And obviously vocal fatigue is something to be very, very mindful of and very careful with. When my voice is fatigued, I am going very slowly through my warm-ups. I usually like to incorporate more SOVT exercises, like lip trills, straw exercises. I'll do more of that at the beginning of my warm-up, just because, the voice is such a delicate instrument. I mean, our vocal folds are very resilient, but we've got to treat them with care. But kind of just as a general rule for everybody during the wintertime, extend your warm-ups. Don't be afraid to use those SOVTs and make your warm-up a little bit longer, just to give your voice more time to warm up. All right, so that concludes all of my little tips for navigating the winter season. To recap what I shared in this episode, I had mentioned embracing and romanticizing the season, cozying up, layering up, going out for those outdoor walks if you feel up to it, adding in those seasonal fruits and veggies to your meals if you feel up to it and if you want to and if you've got the funds for it. I also mentioned hydration, steaming and nebulizing if you would like to go that far. Improving air quality and circulation when you can and if you can. I will add one more thing to that air quality piece of things. Even just cracking open a window can be really helpful for circulating new air in your space. So if you're at home and you don't have access to a fan on your HVAC system or an air purifier, just crack a window. I know it'll be a little bit chilly, but if you want to really circulate new air and get some fresh air, cracking a window for a little bit can be really useful for that. I also mentioned using herbs, though doing your research beforehand before buying anything. And also extending and slowing down your vocal warm-up. All right, that is all I've got for you guys this week. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you've got your own things that you like to do during the winter time, maybe things that I haven't mentioned here, feel free to share those with me on Instagram. You can just DM me at VEROSE Music. Sources for this episode are cited in the description. Also, if you really enjoyed this episode, I would really love it if you shared a 5-star review on your platform of choice, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. You can even drop a comment on YouTube if you really loved this episode. And for now, happy singing, y'all.